teach music business and arts administration at FIU in the Wertheim School of Music. And so, is my presentation up? Can I? Okay. So today, Jean-Marie had asked me to talk about kind of what I'm doing in the academic side to try and kind of bridge that gap in innovation, kind of in music revenue, and the digital divide. And let's see if I can, yeah, okay, that's perfect. So as we know, traditional kind of revenue streams included things like, you know, concert tours and record sales. And obviously, we just heard Jessica with intellectual property and copyright. And then the 20th century came and Napster came, right? And very similar to what you were talking about, that the music industry always seems to be behind, and then the laws catch up, and, you know, intellectual property and copyright, and the process of what is creativity and how does that kind of formulate into something that you and I were talking about the starving artist, and do you always have to be the starving artist? And, you know, why can't you make a living out of something that you love, that you create, that kind of defines who you are? And so this entire ChatGPT conversation is like, to me, because obviously I'm left brain, right brain, right? And it's in academia right now, we're like, stay away from GPT because, you know, students are using it to cheat and this and that. And I'm like, no, it's kind of like you're saying, it's taking over. Like, it's something that you just, you know, we need to understand how to embrace it, how to, you know, not only create revenue streams, but how to use it in aiding the process, right? And so I think that today, revolution has really, you know, transformed the entire industry. And today it's, you know, ChatGPT and AI, right? 15, 18 years ago, it was Napster. Before that, you know, 1920s was like the talkies. It was like the first time, right? Synchronization kind of came in. And so there's always something that, for better or for worse, right? I mean, we're all creative artists, right, in our industry. And so I actually happen to think it's for the better. It's kind of breaking kind of walls, but it's understanding, very similar to what was talked about, how do we get ahead of this? You know, we're busy creating and we're having a great time, but in the meantime, in a parallel kind of structure, in a parallel highway, all these things are happening, and people are, you know, creating, and digital content and playing with your instrument, whether that instrument is voice, violin, cello, or oboe, has been happening for years, right? There are entertainers that don't necessarily have a voice outside their studio, right? Because they're enhanced digitally by an audio board. And an audio board has been in the system for a very, very long time. And so pre kind of internet, you know, music, the way that revenue came in for the artist, right, which was pretty much the least person paid, right? The performer on stage was the least person paid. And when the 5 major labels, you know, were around, really the revenue stream was physical distribution, right? So physical distribution, whether it started in LPs, right? And then obviously moving on over to CDs, and then post kind of internet music scene, physical distribution for a long time became obsolete. And, you know, I mean, I hang around 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. So I feel like I'm 80 around them, you know? And it's like, they don't really know, other than, thank goodness, Barnes & Noble, right? Bringing about the vinyl again, and kind of it being nostalgic just makes me feel old every single day. Sometimes, you know, I make comments on, you know, Bee Gees, and, you know, how I used to dance for one of the and they're like, the Bee Gees? I'm like, holy smokes. You know, so it's like they don't necessarily understand this kind of revenue stream of point of sale and physical distribution. And, you know, to them, today it's very common, right? the streaming, that's all. They don't want anything, in their hand. What are you talking about? And sometimes when we make their portfolio or their demo, depending, because I also teach arts administration, so obviously at a university you try and not necessarily have a mass appeal, because that's not a good thing, right? But to appeal to the masses, right? So we talk about commercial music and contemporary popular music, even to the extreme of new music, right? But then we also really cover a lot of arts administration, right? The nonprofit sector. And by the way, in classical music, you couldn't survive a revenue stream without a physical CD. Imagine that. There are still in classical concerts CDs, physical CDs being sold. So is it obsolete? Is it genre specific? Absolutely. Absolutely. So where are we going to kind of like this takeover that we've been talking about? How can we really kind of look at it? Well, the music industry's always had the basics, right? You create something. And, it's interesting because and I'm sorry, this is a little academic, but, my students are always like, what do you mean exploit? I'm like, yes. You don't want to go through the copyright.gov office and have your music sitting in the Library of Congress and just sitting there. Exploitation in a positive sense, right? Because copyright was there to create and to exponentially continue to create, right? And so that's the basic. You create something, you exploit it, you record it, you want others to use it, right? I mean, that's the whole point of this creative outlet and the whole point of distribution, whether physical, whether digital, whatever it is. You want to be able, in the most purest sense of the word, be able to be the creator, the initiator of something that could be replicated. And Jessica talked about, harmony and lyrics and, what portion of that, right, can you recreate? Or creativity begets creativity, right? I used to be a cast member. I used to work for Walt Disney World Entertainment as well after Broadway. And, you sign something that says anything that you think about belongs to Disney. I'm like, whoa, because their big deal is creativity begets creativity. Because you were sitting there watching Belle and, Beauty and the Beast on stage, you had a thought. And you know what? That thought generated from the creativity you saw on stage, all these kinds of things. And so this kind of create, exploit, record, those are the basics. Now we're just really trying to understand the rise of this business and say, okay, now it's not just create and exploit and record and distribute, but that word distribute has so many other kinds of meanings, whether physical, whether digital, right? And the music licensing part of it, is just one aspect of how you can create revenue, for yourself. I'm, in conversations before the conference started, I was talking to someone about startups, and like FIU has an entire office just on startups because that's all these young kids want to do. It's like, I want to start up my own company. I want to, for musicians, it's always been, I want to have my own band and I want to tour the world, kind of thing. And so startups are big, and so live music focused on producing and live promoting, is one of the kind of big things that our artists do today. So I thought that I would kind of just put together, and I do not have my MBA. I got an MFA, and my PhD is in arts administration and kind of governance structures and how that affects performance. But I thought that it'd be interesting to kind of just look at a typical definition of a business model, right? That basically describes the rationale of how an organization creates, delivers, and captures the value, right, of that content or that product. And then a music business model definition by somebody named Tommy Barker, who does a lot of research on this as well. He said that a music business model is basically a system that describes how music enterprise creates, how it distributes, captures, right, cultural and commercial value. And there's a whole kind of music business model that he kind of looks at, which basically is the model that that is done on a day-to-day basis for music business, right? And so we have partners. On the left side, it's really mostly about your expenses, and on the right side of right in between the superstar, right in the center, you'll see that that's the value and that's kind of the product, obviously. And then on the right side, it talks about how you can create revenue and different forms of revenue, either through relationships or, you know, your customer is your fan base, or is your fan base your customer kind of thing. So the traditional model, right, when there were the 5 kind of record labels, this is taken from Pledge Music, and the traditional kind of model of revenue stream was, here you are in your studio, right, all the way on the bottom on the left-hand side. I don't know if you could see the word studio. It's pretty, there we go. So on the left-hand side, here you are working away. You're the musician, right? And the traditional model of, you know, the latter part or mid part of the 20th century was nobody really knew, right, how much work was going on in the studio at that time. And then poof, you hit a drop date, you hit your street date, and the marketing begins, right? And this kind of myth of overnight success, we all know, right? That overnight success doesn't exist. Overnight success could be as long as 15 years. Right? 10 years, 5 years, right? But this kind of new 21st century model is, and even in the 20th century, right? I mean, we all loved like behind the scenes. Everybody wanted to know, but there was no way to really communicate or capture that to your fan base and to your audience. And so that relationship of I should create a relationship with my fan base. It's not just about superstardom, and then they come, they see me on stage, I'm performing, they love it, and then what happens? You buy the CD, you buy the merch, right? Merchandising, additional revenue streams, or you buy the stream, right? You download 1 tune, 2 tunes. Sometimes these 18, 19, 20-year-olds are like, an album? What do you mean? You have to buy the whole thing? I don't want to buy the whole thing. I like this one, and I like number 7, and I like number 9. You know, and it's really, you know, a totally different kind of model to start marketing from the beginning, right? So now we don't even think of it twice, right? The music producer, I mean, I'm sure there's somebody videoing you on the board, and you're catching the promo, and you're catching this, and then it's Instagram this, and TikTok that, and put it on Facebook, and social media, and all the media outlets. Because now, it's not only about revenue of physical products, and I'm not even talking about AI, but just the actual product of what they purchase, whether it's a streaming service through iTunes, right? Or they download one track, or but it's about selling the experience. And I think that that's really kind of the 21st century model that is almost innate in our product, that is so important to increase revenue, because people now need a connection to understand the value even of 99 cents versus, you know, $27.99 for a vinyl album that, you know. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I had 2, I thought I was a DJ, you know, I was 9 years old, I had 2 vinyl, you know, 2 record players, and I was, they don't do that anymore, right? So that kind of understanding of this new model, where marketing begins in the studio, marketing begins in the creative aspect of it, and you have to kind of story tell them, right? All these storyboards on film, and all storyboards of television, you know, series, or that's happening to us now. We're having to create and tell a story in order to, and you know, I happen to think it's wonderful because people appreciate more the experience, and they take that experience with them. You know, some songs are meant to make you cry, some are meant to make you angry, some are meant to give you, you know, understanding that ethos and that pathos in the creative process is really important. But now, that creative process is being exploited in the most positive sense of the word, right? Marketing from the beginning, from the studio session, and not just at the street date. But look what happens, right? Campaign sales, if you look at the chart, is higher by the time the street date drop date of that single, the track, whatever it is that comes out, right? And so it's important, you know, and I think we touched upon this in the first presentation, where innovation is kind of taken over. And so what happened is the industry had to change. I mean, we made revolutionary changes, right? iTunes was kind of like the radical changer, right? It was the first kind of online kind of retailer, and they had novel pricing models, right? Who couldn't afford, right, in their mind, right? And it was ingenious marketing, but who couldn't afford 99 cents for one song, right? And so it was kind of like the exponential rate of not necessarily quantity over quality, but the quality of the product being quantified in a manner that could otherwise never have been possible. There is no way that you could physically distribute as much product, your creative product, as you could digitally through this kind of mass, right, new novel pricing model. You know, so what happened, right? Streaming drives the global market, you know, and in 2001, you know, when Apple released kind of like the first iPod, and, you know, now it looks like an antiquated little, you know, device, right? We're at a $26 billion, right, industry. And so, but what other ways, the challenge question that Jean-Marie, you know, and I were kind of emailing back and forth about is, how else can you make money off of it, right? So physical distribution, digital distribution, the AI model, which I won't even attempt to go into, but really, what other ways? And so, what other ways? So how can digital music, right, and the performance stage kind of come together, right? And so another phenomenon, right, that happened in the music industry, and I think, you know, I'm an optimist, so I always make lemonade out of lemons, and I always like to look at even a financial spreadsheet and go, oh, how am I going to make this project work, right? How am I going to bring these artists on a tour? And, you know, and it's understanding, right, what happened in the pandemic. We weren't able to go anywhere. We weren't able to do anything. Stages were closed, right? And so I'm just about to release, hopefully in August, it'll be distributed. And of course, it's an online book, because who needs paper anymore? No, I'm being facetious, but it is an online book. But anyways, the book talks about, you know, the performance stage and how you can capitalize it, and another source of revenue. And, you know, the question, of course, is, but come on, sitting there live in the performance, isn't that much better than? Yes, in my opinion, personally, yes, but professionally, I've been able to listen to the Berliner Philharmonic, right from my home. You know, and maybe new audiences are being created for music, right? In the classical sense, in the commercial sense, with up-and-coming rising artists that you wouldn't have necessarily known about, right? So, what I start thinking about is, how can we still make live performance, right? A revenue stream for touring, because touring is one of the largest, right, kind of revenue streams for a performer, and then subsequently that, the composer, right, or arranger, and producer. But how can we make sure, because I don't think we've perfected it yet, it's too new, right? So understanding how to make the audience in that live performance, whether it's 5,000 people, 2,000 people, 30,000 seat arena. How can we make that experience exciting? And that's one revenue stream, right? Because you have your ticket, and then they're definitely going to go by the lobby for all the merchandising, right? And hopefully, you're going to buy the $50 t-shirt, right? Or whatever it is. So that's an additional, right, revenue stream. But then all of a sudden, there's all this digital kind of global market that you can also have as an additional revenue stream. But you have to kind of perfect the artistic quality of that. It's not just putting the camera center stage in the house, right? And having it there, you need maybe 17 cameras, depending on where you're coming from, right? You need crisp, exact sound quality that comes out of it. And it's not necessarily about mastering and mixing, but it's having maybe two, having the live, right, experience, and then having a perfected kind of CD, which is what us artists always want to have, right? So additional revenue streams, and maybe things that we're not even thinking about right now, but live performance and being able to connect those two, I think is a revenue stream that could be added to this whole additional total market, $45 billion industry, right? Market. So thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks so much again, Jean-Marie, for having me here today. I'm so enjoying all of the wonderful conversations and lovely, debates. That's what it's all about, right? Moving it forward. So thank you so much.